Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, Professor of Brazilian History and Culture, Emeritus at Brown University, and the National Co-Coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Erika Robb Larkins, who is a professor of anthropology, the Behner Stiefel Chair of Brazilian Studies, and the director of the Behner Stiefel Center for Brazilian Studies at California State University, San Diego. Larkins' research and teaching focuses on violence and inequality in urban settings. Her first book, The Spectacular Favela, Violence in Modern Brazil, published by the University of California Press in 2015, explores the political economy of spectacular violence in one of Rio's most famous favelas. Her second book, The Sensation of Security, Private Guards and the Social Order in Brazil, was recently published by Cornell University Press. She has also written about race, gender, and politics in Brazil, with recent articles appearing in the American Ethnologist, City and Society, and the Journal for Latin American and Caribbean Anthropology, and in public outlets including Al Jazeera, El País, and Estado, the Estado de São Paulo. Her current work focuses on environmental racism in low-income communities in Rio de Janeiro and Bahia, examining how people are impacted by extreme heat, water pollution, changes to oceans and tides, and ongoing land and real estate speculation. And in addition to all of her activities, Erika is the president of the Brazilian Studies Association, known as BRASA, and a member of the board of the directors of the Washington Brazil office. Erika, welcome to Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's great to be here.
So let's just jump into the first question that was on everyone's mind. In the lead up to the US presidential elections, which by all accounts seems like it will be a very close contest, what do you think will be the impact of the US-Brazil relations and the situation in Brazil, depending on the outcome?
Yeah, Jim, I think this is a question that we're all thinking about, and perhaps feeling a lot of trepidation as we eke closer to the elections. I think, what is clear is that if Trump is elected, it will set a kind of global agenda on issues related to human rights, the environment, women's rights, and so on, that will have an impact, no doubt, not just in Brazil, but in a very far-reaching sense. If Kamala Harris is elected, I think that we're going to see a different kind of agenda. My more pessimistic colleagues might say, well, it's like a status quo. Perhaps relationships between the U.S. and Brazil will remain sort of as they have been. And people that are more excited perhaps about a Harris presidency feel like it will also send a really strong message to Brazil that U.S. voters believe in and support a Black woman president.
And it seems to me that if Trump is not elected, then it's possible that the prosecutions of him will continue. I'm not sure he'll end up in jail, but that will also, I think, reinforce what perhaps is happening in Brazil, which is the January 8th investigations and prosecutions of people involved in the uprising there. So I guess that's another side consequence, or perhaps side consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it models, it sets a standard, right, that's going to have wide-reaching repercussions. And, so far in terms of accountability for, both January 6th and January 8th, Brazil's done a much better job than the US has in holding people to account, even though all of this is sort of still unfolding, right?
Right. So this is a question I'm sure you're asked 100,000 times a year, and I'm going to ask it to you. How did you get interested in Brazil?
Sure, Jim. Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit, and it's a long story because it's been a long relationship, which actually starts with my mother. Before I was born, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm going to tell you a good story, right? Had a dream, and she was 28, and she dreamt one night that she was wearing white. And she was on a beach, a beautiful beach filled with people throwing flowers into the ocean. And she later realized that this was a dream that was Copacabana Beach. And this was people celebrating, the New Year's celebrations, as they typically do in Brazil, by honoring the Orisha of the ocean, Iemanjá. So this awakened in her this dream, and then this later realization that what she had dreamed of, a lifelong desire to go to Brazil. So when I was growing up, she was eventually able to realize this dream, and she took me and my brothers with her to Brazil, where she subsequently became involved with Umbanda and Candomblé. So my first experiences of Brazil, and this is, in the very early 90s, was, singing pontos for the Orixá. That's how I learned Portuguese, and following my mother into these terreiro spaces, which at the time was not, I think now this is a little more common. At the time, we were pretty unusual, I guess you could say. So that was my introduction to Brazil. These early experiences of being part of this terreiro, with my family being involved in that kind of space, I think really did orient me toward social and racial justice work later. So it's interesting. And it also taught me a lot about Brazilian culture and community across class and racial differences, which, are things that I continue to work on and think about in my academic work.
No, and as I talk to other people who become Brazilianists, as we call ourselves, and get involved in Brazil, it's the people I think who have been touched very deeply in a personal way with something about the country. In mine, it was around the history of torture and repression during the dictatorship, which really moved me and still kind of is part of my own personal political agenda. But your story is wonderful, and I think it kind of leads into the next question I want to ask you. As an anthropologist, your research focuses on public security and violence in Brazil. And so tell us that your process of getting involved in that topic and what you've learned from that topic.
Sure. So, it's funny. It really didn't start out that way. I mean, I think, as you know, Jim, like a lot of research projects, we start with one thing and we end up with something else, right? And initially, I actually had thought that I was going to work on religion. Some of my early projects were related to religion because I had this kind of unusual or unique window in and access into communities that hadn't been so studied. But what I realized really quickly was that academic work has, you have a lot of kind of critical analytical energy that comes from doing academic work, and that I learned that it was better. It worked a lot better for me to direct that energy toward things that were social problems that needed attention. And so I didn't start out as a scholar of violence, but I ended up there. And it also started out, looking out the window, driving in the car, in Brazil with my mom, looking out the window, passing favela after favela after favela. We went to people's homes in favelas in Sao Paulo. So I didn't have the kind of fear mentality about these spaces as I think that many other people, especially people that grow up in middle class settings like me, have toward these kinds of spaces. So, and I knew people that lived in these communities as part of, that were part of sort of my spiritual family in the terreiro. So I understood the favela as a place of nuance, I guess, and as a place of struggle, perseverance, resistance, as much as it was a space of sort of state violence and neglect. And so I think that my interest in this really came because I was thinking about these spaces and the people that I knew that lived in these spaces and wanting to understand their stories.
So you start by talking about this, sharing this with a public in your book, The Spectacular Favela, Violence in Modern Brazil, which was published by University of California Press in 2015. Could you tell us a little bit about the book and what you argue in the book and what you learned from the book?
Sure, Jim. Thanks. So the book is based on long-term residence in Rocinha, which is the largest favela in Rio. It's a famous favela, sort of part of Rio's postcard image, perched right above the sort of famous beaches. And it had, at the time that I arrived there, I first visited Rocinha in 2004, or 2005. So this next year will be 20 years that I have been going to this community, and for both for research and for the whole life that I have there now. I know you understand this, Jim, too, that we begin to have lives in our in our places of study that can go on, for a lifetime, I guess. So the book is based on this long-term residence there. So I lived in the community for almost 2 years. And I was interested in how Rocinha had become a tourist destination. It's the most visited community in Rio. It kind of, at the time that I started my research, it had become part of what it meant to see Rio. So you would go to the Sugarloaf, to the Cristo, to the beach, and to Rocinha, and to a favela. At the same time that it was sort of becoming this tourist place, it was still a community, and it continues to be a community that had a lot of challenges, right? Really booming drug trafficking industry. It moves a lot of drugs and money move through that community, and also a place of a lot of state repression. So a lot of, violent policing and that sort of thing. And so I was interested in trying to understand, well, how can these things exist together? How do you have this favela that people are interested in visiting, and at the same time have all these other things? And so, I was really interested in asking, how did Rocinha become, with all of its problems, a global brand that was profitable for people? So that was that's the overall question that I ask in the book.
I've only gone to communities when I'm invited. I just find the favela tourism abhorrent. I find it such a horrible voyeurism that I want nothing to do with it. And when people visit me in Rio, I said, no, I'm not doing that, unless someone from the community actually invites me. So you've discovered something which seemed to be positive, but on the other hand, I'm sure your own sensibilities make it feel a little creepy that you have these foreigners coming and looking at, happy poverty and in a community which is largely Afro-Brazilian. It seems very creepy to me, but how do the community members relate to this? How do they understand this phenomenon? And I know there's many different ways to
No,
answer.
you're asking all the right questions, Jim. And I share, I think a lot of people share that sentiment that, visiting places that, where, you're coming from a more affluent context where you're sort of looking at poverty. I would counter that it's not just poverty, it's also that you're looking at violence, right? And on different kinds of scales, right? And how do people, people often come to these tours having encountered, like what I call in the book, like a pre-tour media of some kind. So they will have seen, of course, still the most famous thing that everybody's seen is City of God. And they'll have seen City of God. They'll have maybe seen, Tropa de Elite or some of these other movies. So they come to the communities already kind of primed with this idea to see a certain kind of thing. I would say, so I talk about in the book that there's really sort of two strains of this tourism. One are folks that come seeking a kind of a more adventure experience where they're thinking about, guns and, kingpins and this whole kind of universe of crime that, of course, we have a million TV shows that are organized around these themes, and they want to come and kind of see that part. And there's a whole tourism that caters to them, right? And even a guide that doesn't want anything to do with that is still gonna have those people with those interests asking questions, driving a kind of narrative that is about their interests, right? Because a tourist, any kind of tour is an exchange. So no matter what you want to say as a tour guide, and I've tried working as a tour guide in different times, this is interesting for me from a research standpoint, you can't control the narrative completely. So there's that kind. I don't think that's actually the dominant kind, but it does exist. And the other kind is what I call kind of solidarity tourism, which is people that really think that they're there sort of bearing witness or testimony to state violence, to poverty, to racism, to exclusion with their presence. And those kinds of tours are really organized around celebrating them for crossing, the boundary between the city and the asphalt, providing a lot of history, oftentimes highlighting the very, commendable, amazing history of struggle of the community itself. But the problem with these is that, people aren't, the tours aren't really creating any meaningful change, right? So people feel like they're there in solidarity, but like, what is our solidarity worth in this context? So this is what I tell people when they say, oh, I'm going to Rio, should I go on one of these? And I say, well, if you want to go, you should go, but you should understand that it's about you. Like, you're going for your own education to learn something, and you should check all your privilege and think all, feel all your feels that are related to you being in that space. But you shouldn't think that you're actually bringing about meaningful change by being there. You have to do much more than just go for 3 hours, and then go to Cristo and Sugarloaf. So
And is
I
there
don't know
any?
if that changes your mind about going, Jim, but
No, it's, I mean,
yeah.
and of course, I'm not at all inferring that your relationship is a real
Oh,
authentic one, as I think my relationship with Brazil is. I think also I imagine in those spaces that I'm seen as a gringo of a certain kind. I have a friend who lives in Dona Marta in Botafogo, and he's invited me to go to his house, and I said, "Well, isn't everyone going to assume that I'm going up there to buy drugs from you?" And he said, "No, they're not going to assume that." I said, "Okay, well, maybe we'll visit." But there's a whole notion of being the outsider and being seen that way. But is there any? I mean, is there any positive economic impact on the community other than the tour guides that it works, or maybe the luncheonette that they go to have lunch, that is, they've made a deal with the owner of the little bar that serves them food or something?
I think this is something that has changed in a positive way, actually, Jim, since the time that I started doing this research. When I first started, there was all the companies were owned and operated by people that didn't live in the community. So there was a really clear, sort of obvious relationship, a complicated, let's say, economic relationship. It added to those issues around exploitation that we've touched upon. What has changed is that there's a lot more people from the community that are tour guides, that lead tours, that are representing their own, the place that they live in their own way. And that's, of course, something to emphasize, that there's not just one Rocinha. I mean, there are multiple, like, all of the perspectives that guides bring touch on different aspects of being a community member. So, and there are, those folks are earning a living, are making money, are making connections. So that's something I think that is really positive in terms of the transformation of the industry since the time that I first started doing it. I don't think that those people are running the majority of tours. I think the majority of tours are still run through these kind of larger companies, but it has changed, that the community members are more able to represent themselves to tourists. And something else is that the presence of foreigners, at least in Zona Sul favelas, is pretty normalized. I don't think anybody now, there's people that live in those communities because real estate rent prices are really expensive in Rio. I think it's really changed. I don't think that people are as outsiders are as notable. I mean, in Rocinha, nobody looks twice at you anymore because they're so used to people from the outside, walking around and being in the community. So,
Oh, interesting. So a second book, The Sensation of Security, Private Guards and the Social Order in Brazil, was published by Cornell University Press in 2023. So what did you find in your research for this work?
yeah, so this book, I mean, so the first book, I was really looking at, I'm looking at the community. I mean, a lot of it is about tourism, but it's also about, the long-term war on drugs that the community finds itself wrapped up in. So, I was looking, it was more focused on crime and the experience of being policed and sort of how all of that gets wrapped up into tourism. I felt at the time that I couldn't really think about or engage ethnographically with police because I lived in Rocinha. Because of the nature of the book, it wasn't really possible to kind of do both at the same time. And so I was interested in doing work, continuing my work on state violence by thinking more deeply about policing, security, which are always, enormous issues in Rio. I also was sort of following or responding to what I saw my interlocutors in the first book doing. So lots of people that I had talked to for the first book opened private security companies. They began to work in the private security industry. And all of this is because the security industry itself is sort of growing with the World Cup and the Olympics. And so that's one part. So there are these global events that are driving sort of the security presence and thinking about new models of security. This was taking place at the same time that community policing was really the model. So there was sort of this general sort of thinking about how could security look different? You know, is it possible to have something that isn't, you know, police going to favelas and shooting at everybody? You know, what are the possibilities, right? And at the same time, so these companies are opening and all of that. And I know for, you know, anyone, Jim, I'm sure you can relate to this. There is a pervasive sense of insecurity in large Brazilian cities. Real or not, right? Linked to actual crime rates or not. There's this sense of insecurity that sort of permeates people's everyday experiences and structures their everyday experiences in all kinds of ways. And the private security industry was responding to that. It was like, you know, and realizing that that was actually a very lucrative avenue for expansion. So that was sort of what led me into to look at the book, was both, you know, this moment, this really unusual moment where, I mean, there was all kinds of global consultants and global companies and people there setting up all sorts of things for the World Cup and the Olympics, and then all kinds of police officers opening their own companies, responding to that. And then this overall, you know, permeating sense of insecurity, where it really created an opportunity for what I would call a kind of security capitalism that boomed in the time that I was doing the research for this book.
Do you think it has any real impact on people's lives, this increased amount of security, which within the context of preventing, you know, as you said, the military police coming in and shooting at random and killing lots and lots of innocent people?
I mean, I think that one of the big takeaways from the book is that, and this will sound really cynical, but, you know, it doesn't really matter if it's working or not, if it makes people feel like it's working. And that's sort of the great, like, you know, illusion, I guess I would say, of all of this security apparatus. So and the people that work in these industries would, you know, said things very directly like this, like, you know, it doesn't matter if we actually stop the crime, it just matters that people think we're stopping it. The overall takeaway here is that the provision of security across all of these levels, you know, is really about communicating a sense of security to people, which is why that's hence the name of the book, rather than actually, you know, concrete results, let's say.
Very, very interesting. So you moved on to other topics, as we all need to do once we've kind of done too much in one area, and now you're working on environmental issues in low-income communities. What led you to the topic, and what are you actually working on in the moment or in this period?
So this is also, I think, similarly to the second book, this is a response to the kinds of issues that my long-term interlocutors in low-income communities were talking about. People were saying, you know, and experiencing flooding, you know, always lots of problems with, you know, electricity provision, basic infrastructure, and increasingly extreme heat, right? And that's the main project that I've been working on for the last few years or so, is looking at how what extreme heat can tell us about social and racial inequality in the city of Rio and beyond. So, you know, our ability to exercise thermal control over our bodies is really linked to privilege. It's a kind of a privilege. So if you can escape, you know, Rio's increasingly hot summers by accessing air conditioning, if you work indoors, if you have running water that always comes out of your faucet in your condominium, you have significantly more privilege than people that live in places like Hosina that experience frequent blackouts, that don't have stable electrical connections for air conditioners, and don't have running water lots of times during heat waves. So I've been working on this project together with my colleague Jen Roth-Gordon that focuses on what extreme heat can tell us about these issues.
Fascinating. I was just last week talking to someone about who was suffering from the extreme heat in Rio and trying to find solutions because the person didn't have much money to pay for air conditioning, couldn't afford the electric bill. So how do you survive? So I have admired you from afar because I don't know how long ago it was, there was an advertisement for a chair in Brazilian studies at California State University, San Diego. And with a generous donation of the Behner Stiefel Foundation, I guess, or people, they have established a wonderful Brazilian Studies Center at California State University, San Diego. I had taught for 8 years at Long Beach, and so I understand how the state university system works in California. And I was really very, very happy that you were able to be its first director and have built the program. The Brazilian Studies Association had its last Congress there, and I was able to attend. So tell me more about what you're doing there and what's the vision is, and what you think might be having an effect on Brazilian studies from your work there.
I'm so glad you asked me this question, because this gives me a chance to say that I really do have the best job in the world, because I have the opportunity to, with lots of incredible partners, build this Center for Brazilian Studies, the Behner Stiefel Center for Brazilian Studies. So it was founded in 2014, and we are celebrating 10 years this year.
Wow.
The vision is really to create a world-class interdisciplinary research and teaching center with, I think, and increasingly in the last couple of years, as we sort of grow and realize where we can contribute to the field of Brazilian studies, I think and also reflecting our strengths as an institution. I mean, as a HSI, as a certain kind of institution in the Cal State system, we really have a special focus on social and environmental justice in Brazil. So it's an interdisciplinary center. We have faculty from, geography, anthropology, environmental engineering, business, Portuguese, humanities, art, history. But we're really, I would say that our overall focus, where all of these sort of strains are coming together, are around issues related to social and environmental justice. We are busy, we're growing. We just launched the first Brazilian studies major in the CSU. So
wow.
That's exciting. We do a lot of events. So we're really involved with bringing people from Brazil to campus. We do something like between 15 and 20 events per year. And the idea there really is to be a bridge between the incredible work that Brazilian scholars, activists are doing, and bringing what they're already doing that is incredible into the U.S. academic context. I mean, we also have all kinds of student programming. So we take students to Brazil. We have some programs that foster undergraduate research experiences in Brazil. We feel really lucky to be able to build something with the support of the Behner Stiefels as well.
So you are also the president of the Brazilian Studies Association, an organization that I was very involved in over the years and really care about. Maybe you can tell our audience a little bit more about the Brazilian Studies Association, what its goals are, what it does.
BRASA, the Brazilian Studies Association, is wonderful. It's the professional organization for folks that study Brazil in the US. I would emphasize that, it really is an organization that is focused on the teaching and research of Brazil in the United States, specifically. So I think it has a little bit of a different mission, let's say there. It's interdisciplinary, I think, and incredibly, and becoming each year more and more interdisciplinary, from maybe something that started a little more focused on, languages and the traditional humanities, but now really brings together people from all sorts of disciplines to have really great conversations about Brazil. So, the signature sort of activity is this Congress that you mentioned before that we hosted in San Diego this year. It was, I think, the biggest or one of the biggest that the association's ever seen. There was over 600 people in attendance, hundreds of panels, just absolutely incredible energy, people really excited and interested in coming together to exchange ideas and talk about their own work and also challenges that face Brazil. We also award papers. We award, best article and best book, really trying to provide more visibility to folks that are doing excellent and outstanding work on Brazil. So those are some of the main activities. I think in my role as president, we're starting to look toward our next Congress, which will be in Bahia in 2026 at UFPA. And I'm also really interested in thinking a little bit about how we can, as an organization, highlight the work that Brazilian studies centers and departments of Portuguese, other kinds of units within US universities that are already doing the work of Brazilian studies, how we can kind of bring them together or highlight the work that they're already doing in a cohesive way. I think this is really important, especially related to Portuguese. I think with university budget cuts, sometimes people need to be reminded that Portuguese is really, really, really important, and it's absolutely essential for Brazilian studies programs. And so I'm excited to think, as in my role as president, about how we can bring more visibility to the great work that our colleagues are doing in Portuguese departments and language departments and in Latin American studies centers and all of that, trying to figure out a way to really kind of aggregate and showcase that great work that's going on as part of Brazilian studies in the US.
So, Erika, you've also joined me over the years to be very much a part of the democracy movement in Brazil, supporting the efforts of people in Brazil who have been fighting to sustain democracy in the country. We went through a really difficult period since the parliamentary coup against Dilma Rousseff, the years of Temer and Bolsonaro, and now there's been almost 2 years of the Lula government. What is your overall feeling about what's going on in Brazil? I mean, how are you looking at things in the general terms?
Yeah, there's sort of two things that I've been thinking about. One is, what is the next generation of leadership on the left look like? I think this is an interesting question. I'm sure that, like you, Jim, I was really concerned to read about Lula's fall and maybe some potential health challenges there. And it got me thinking again, okay, what is the next generation, going to look like? And, who's ready, and where is the space being made for these people to really begin to occupy, more roles and think about what that looks like into the future. I would ask the same questions, in the US. I think we're also wondering, what does that look like, at least until, very recently. The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about is, what US-Brazil relations looks like. And in some ways, there's this part of US-Brazil relations on the far right that is really boomed, right? There are these, the far right is extremely organized and has, developed this kind of global network where you have people, in the US going to, I'm going to say like Miami, and, there's this kind of these kind of transnational conversations happening there that, as much as I might find them personally concerning, they are really strong examples of US-Brazil collaboration that merit some thinking. And so those are kind of two of the things that I'm paying attention to and thinking about right now.
So I want to just say, on behalf of the Washington Brazil office, of which I'm the president of the board of directors, we're very excited about collaborating with your projects in San Diego and California, and building partnerships to the extent possible. You're doing really amazing work. It's really becoming one of the centers of excellence in the United States. And I speak from having built something at Brown over the years too, that was there when I came, but then I strengthened. And so we're really, really happy to see all the hard work you've done over the last decade. And congratulations for all that work.
No, Jim, and thank you, because I know I've said this to you before, but I'm glad to get to say it on this podcast too, that it really has been your work that has made so much of this possible. Your just incredible ability to bring people together, not only at Brown, but especially through the USNDB and now with the WBO. It's really just been an incredible, incredible effort that is really inspiring and fortifying for so many people. So thank you.
That's very generous of you to say. We have a lot of work yet to do. But Erika, I want to thank you so much for having joined us today on Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
So I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.